Hello. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to get into PyCharm for the first time and go through the individual configuration screens so that you know exactly what you need to do each time you create a Python program. So we're going to assume for the moment that you have Python installed, and we already made a video in terms of installing Python and PyCharm. So I'm running a Windows-based machine, running Windows 7. And after installing PyCharm on my machine, I have two icons on my desktop. The one icon that you should see is for the 32-bit version of PyCharm, and then there's a 64-bit version of PyCharm, and that's typically denoted with an x64. For you geeks out there, anything that's listed with an x86 is usually a 32-bit edition, and the x64 is a 64-bit edition. And what I had mentioned during the installation process of the software, I had said that it really doesn't matter which version you use. I'm just going to use the 32-bit version, and I'll go through the configuration screens from here. So before I get into PyCharm, if you recall when at the end of the installation video for Python and PyCharm, I had mentioned that in order to develop a program in Python, we have to put together our Python code in something referred to as a source code file. And while you don't actually need PyCharm to develop a Python program, it certainly makes the process a lot easier. And you're gonna see that over the course of the next several activities. Let's get started showing you how this process works. So once you double click on the icon for PyCharm, PyCharm will launch, and you'll see a very simple user interface screen with three options. And we're going to go over one of the options in this particular video so you can see how it's done. So if you recall from the last video, one of the things that I had said was in order to create a working Python program, it's a two-step process. One is going to be to create a Python project. And then once you create the project, you actually put together a Python source code file. So let's go through that process. So once you've launched PyCharm, the option we're going to be looking at is right here, is create new project. So I'm going to go ahead and click on create new project. And it looks incredibly simple, but there's two pieces of information that we need to set up in order for this to work correctly. The first is location. And under location, the default is the secondary storage device or the hard drive on the PC that you're working on. So on the personal computer that I have that's running Windows 7, the default location is the C drive, which is our hard drive. And you see the path in which PyCharm is going to put the project file for the new project we're going to create. So this is not where I want it to be. If you take a look at lab activity number 1, it talks about having you put together a very simple Python program, not expecting you to understand the individual Python syntax, but it's okay. It's just to get you familiar with what we're about to do right now. What I would like to do is I want to direct the Python project file to the shared network resource on the Loyola server. That's our G drive. Now, everything we're doing right here is assuming that you've already installed three different components. One is the My Work Drive client software that we had originally put together in Module A. Then in Module C, I had you going through the process of installing Python and PyCharm. Remember I said that it was only a one-time thing. Once it's installed, we're ready to go. So I'm going to move this window to the side a little bit. And with that in mind, that means I can see my G drive. And so if I go to one of my file folders and I take a look at the left-hand side screen here, you notice that I have my G drive, and it's got a prefix of //MWD1. That's the default designator for this particular drive, which is the My Work Drive 1. And I'm going to open up this window just a little bit. You'll see it's set to G drive on the Loyola resource. Okay, so I'm going to close this because we don't need it any longer. So what I would like to do is I would like to go ahead and redirect the project file to the G drive on the shared network resource on the Loyola server. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this ellipsis icon. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And what this is doing, it's saying, okay, the default is the hard drive on your personal computer in a folder called Users, and in my case, Stefanelli. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and if you take a look at the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that there is an option for the G drive. And the G drive, when I expand the G drive, I have, which should be, 2 folders. And if you navigate through this process, you'll see that we have, I'm sorry for the background noise if you hear anything. As soon as I open up the G drive and I expand the home folder, I'm going to scroll down to the summer 2018 file folder. Now this is what you should be able to see, the summer 2018 CS151. Now this SN is not going to be there for you. You're going to put your own section, and my understanding is that it's going to be CS151.W01. So you could always change this if you need to. But in Lab 0 or Lab Activity 0, you actually created a folder structure, which you should have already completed. But if you did it correctly, you're actually going to see that you have what you can see as 4 visible folders. But what I'm going to be doing is I want to put this lab activity, since it's a lab activity, this is lab activity number 1. I'm going to make a folder in the lab activities folder. So I'm going to expand that. And you'll notice it only has 1 folder in here so far. So I'm going to go ahead and click on make sure that the lab activities is highlighted. Now, if you take a look at the top of the screen, there are a number of icons that are sitting at the top here under Select Base Directory for the project. This one icon here, which is a file folder with an orange or red star, whichever color you say it is, that is the icon to create a new folder. Notice it says new folder. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, but make sure that the lab activities folder is selected, because when you do that, I'm going to click it once. I'm going to go ahead and put my new folder name. In this case, it's going to be lab number 1. I'm going to click OK. And when you do that, notice that under lab activities, we have a new folder called lab number 1. That's what you're looking for. Now, the way this works is that it actually builds. We have G, home, summer, lab activities, lab activity 1 or lab 1. And it's listed specifically up here. Now you could write this, you can type this manually, but I think that using the mouse is a lot easier. Okay, so we have the G drive indicates it's on the Loyola shared network drive, the Loyola server. It's in a folder called home, which really it's not home. You see it as home, but according to the Loyola server is assigning your name to it because each person has their own G drive of 5 gigabytes. And inside of home is summer 2018. Inside of summer 2018 is CS151.W01. Then we have lab activities and then lab number 1. That's exactly what you're looking for. Now, when I click OK, notice that the location field in the new project window from PyCharm updates to exactly what it's going to do. What this is telling PyCharm is that it's going to redirect the pointer. If you can imagine a finger pointing to a location, it's actually pointing the finger to a folder called lab number 1, where it's going to create a project file. So that's that part. And you'll go through this a little bit quicker when you go through subsequent lab activities, but that's how you do this process. Next thing, if you recall when we talked about the installation of Python with PyCharm, I mentioned to you I hope you remember, that when you deal with PyCharm, in order for PyCharm to execute your Python source code file, you need to tell PyCharm where Python is located. And that's done by this next area here called the project interpreter. Remember, we talked about Python is a programming language, but it's also referred to as an interpreter rather than a compiler, which some other programming languages are referred to as. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to expand this field, and you're probably getting a little scared right about now, but you don't have to. Most of what you're looking at right here, we really don't have to worry about. As a matter of fact, right now, it's telling, the operating system is telling PyCharm some specific information, but we're going to make it a little bit easier. What we're going to do is we're going to click on Existing Interpreter. And if you notice on the lower left-hand corner of this particular screen, it says No Python Interpreter Selected. So if we were to continue from here, we could write our Python code in PyCharm, but we could not execute it because according to what we're looking at right here, PyCharm has no idea that Python exists. So if you click on the pull down, nothing's there. Okay, so we don't get to it that way. But if you take a look to the right-hand side of the interpreter field, you see that similar ellipsis icon. We're going to click on that. And then from here, we're going to click on System Interpreter. Now, if you take a look what happened, as you clicked on System Interpreter, PyCharm now sees that Python exists in a particular folder on the local hard drive. It's found in a specific folder. The folder structure isn't that critical, but what's something that you need to see is right here. This is saying that we have version 3.6. It's the 32-bit edition, and that's the executable name, or that's the executable file. This is the file name called Python. And what's going to happen is PyCharm is going to work with Python in order to execute our source code. So again, I'm going to go ahead and cancel this so you can do this. We can do this again. We're going to make sure the location is correct. It's located on the G drive. Then we're going to click on Existing Interpreter, use the ellipsis, choose System Interpreter, make sure that we have a version of Python here, and then we're going to click OK. But before I do, I want to reiterate, this is the reason why we install Python prior to PyCharm in the last activity in Module A, because by doing so, PyCharm is able to locate Python because of some of the configuration screens that we went through when we installed Python for the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And notice that when we do, it specifically says that the interpreter we're going to use for this particular project is Python 3.6. So this is basically it. We've just taken care of creating the individual criteria to create our new project for the first Python program we're going to be writing. So at this point, what you want to do is create the project. And so it may take a couple of seconds, but once it goes through, it's actually making communication with the server over at Loyola and making sure that it does what it needs to do on the Loyola side. Now, this next screen is going to continue to appear every single time you create a new project. It's called the tip of the day. It gives you some information. It's got a collection of individual tips that you can choose to keep or not have on the screen. But I got to tell you, in my past experience, you just want to shut it off because you really don't need it. But I also want to show you something else that you need to take a look at. As I don't know if you can see it on my screen, it's currently saying indexing, all right? And there's a little line that's beginning to build. And at some point, that indexing is going to go away. When you want to execute code, one of the things that's important is that when you open up your code or you start a new project, that indexing field, that indexing update needs to be cleared in order for you to continue working with PyCharm and executing your code. So if it doesn't appear that the run feature is available, which we'll get to a little bit later, don't panic. Just take a look in the lower right-hand corner. You may just need to be a little bit patient. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this. It says this external file changes sync may be slow. I'm just going to go ahead and close that. It really doesn't affect us at all. So I'm going to choose to shut those tips off every time we start PyCharm because, quite frankly, I don't want to see them anymore. So once you take the check mark off of Start Show Tips at Startup, I'm going to go ahead and click on Close. Okay, that's it. That's the new project. But you can't do anything. As of right now, you have the ability to create a Python file, but that's the second step in the process. Remember, we said this before. First step is to create a project. Second step is to create a Python file. Now, you'll know that this is working right. I'm going to go ahead and open this up a little bit. This side frame is where everything file related is going to be. And if you'll notice, we have a file folder that says lab number 1. And inside that folder, we have a project. It's called lab number 1. And what we're going to do now is to save yourself some hassle. Okay, I'm just trying to give you some tips from experience. Just go ahead and click it once so that the lab number 1 project is highlighted. So once this is selected, I didn't say double click, I'm just saying single click. You're just going to single click right on this lab number 1 entry. This is what we're trying to work on. At this point, you have two choices. You can right click and choose New Python File. I'm going to leave it here so you can see it. You can right click and choose New Python File. One of the most common mistakes is just choosing File. If you notice at the top of that list, no, you want to choose Python File. Okay, now if you don't want to do it that way, what you can do is once you have this project selected, File, New, and then I can go ahead and hover down, move my mouse down to Python File, and then when you do that, you select Python File. Either way is fine. You're going to get the option to select a name for your Python file. Now, in most cases, what you're going to do is you're going to name your Python file your last name followed by a description of which activity you're working on. So every one of the lab activities, in the next few at least, you're going to see that towards the end of the lab activity requirements document, you'll see where it says, save the Python file as last name. So I'm going to go ahead and put my last name in, comma, and then it says lab activity, and for this particular case, it's going to be lab activity number 1. Now, I wish I could stop the video and just pose a question and say, do you remember what the default file extension was for a Python source code file? Remember I said that when we actually associate PyCharm with the Python source code file, we had to put a check mark next to .py association, so it's an extension .py. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a .py. So you notice that the file name here is called Stefanelli lab activity number 1. The file extension is .py. And once this is in, I go ahead and click OK, and a few things are going to happen. Once you have established a working connection to the Loyola server, you create your project file first, then you create your Python file, which is the source code file, and you'll notice that when you do that, this particular window opens. This is the editor window. This is the window that's going to allow you to write your Python source code and execute your Python source code. Okay, so I'm going to write some Python source code in here now so we can go through the process. Now, what you have to do is a little bit more involved. But just to try to put some code in here, I'm going to go ahead and put this information in. The hashtag is the Python syntax for comment. It's a non-executable line of code. Python does not execute a comment. It's just there for your information. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my name. And I'm going to say CS151. All the information you need to put this together is found in the requirements document for lab activity number 1. You'll see it at the bottom of the document. Computer science through programming, and that's all I'm going to do right now. Okay, so for this lab activity, you're supposed to be asking your partner a series of questions, and you're supposed to put together a Python program. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing what it is that you're supposed to be doing in the lab. I'm just going to put a couple of lines. So I want you to notice that as I begin to type, PyCharm is actually watching what you're doing, and it understands that the print function, in this case, actually has a series of attributes associated with it, and it's telling you what they are right on the screen. So it really does a great job of trying to help you in your coding process. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put a couple of lines in. My name is Professor Stefanelli, and do a couple of more here. I love to cook. And one more, print. I love photography. And I use a Nikon camera. Okay, so that's it. I have a 3-line, this block of code that I'm writing, this is my first Python program. I have a comment block between lines 1 and 5. These will not execute. And you notice they're a little bit grayed out. Let me see if I can, I was trying to see if I could make this a little bit larger. Well, I don't want to burden you with some of the extra pull-down menus, but what we have here is I have 3 lines that are going to be executed. The first one will say, my name is Professor Stefanelli. The next line is going to say, I love to cook. And the next one is going to say, I love photography and I use a Nikon camera. Okay, so once your code is done, the good news, this actually should make you feel a little bit better, is that PyCharm doesn't trust you. It sounds funny, but actually this is a good thing. PyCharm does not trust you. And so as a result, if you try to, what PyCharm will do is automatically save your code as you're typing, which is incredibly powerful, because if you just happen to close out PyCharm and you forgot to save your code, I can imagine multiple versions of, oh shucks, I forgot to save my code coming through your mouth. So it's automatically saving it. So once your code is done, it's already saved. What we're going to do now is we're going to execute our code. So we have a few things that are in here. These are 3 output statements. And all I want you to do in lab activity number 1 is to actually create. You're going to create a collection of questions. You and your partner are going to share the questions. You're going to interview each other, and you're going to put a series of print statements or print functions on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code. So if you take a look now, there's a couple of shortcut areas. Now, if you notice that in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a right-hand arrow, what looks like a little bug, and a little square. If you hover over each of these icons, they'll say what they are. This is the run icon, this is the debug icon, and this is the stop icon. We'll get into those a little bit later on, but the ones you need to know for right now is the one for run. Since we haven't run this program before, we have to do it in a slightly different manner. So we're going to click on the Run menu, and the third option down, it'll say Run. Okay, so there's a key sequence if you wanted to use it with the keyboard, but my suggestion is just go ahead and click on Run. When you do that, it's going to bring up a Run window. Now, you'll notice this is the only real program that's showing on the screen, and it's showing the name of the Python source code file that I had named originally. Now, this name should match the one on the tab. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and choose my Python source code file, and when I do, the screen will eventually open up with an output window so you can see it actually running. Now, it just popped. I hope you can see that. This is the source code, and what it tells me here is this is the output window. So the left-hand side of PyCharm is showing the file structure. The upper right-hand corner is showing the source code or the editor so I can write my source code. And the lower portion of PyCharm is showing the output window. Now, remember we said that PyCharm is an IDE, Integrated Development Environment. Well, you're experiencing the IDE right now. I wrote my source code, I ran it, and here's where it executed. Now, I have three output statements. One says, print, my name is Professor Stefanelli. Next thing it says, print, I love to cook. And the third, it says, I love photography and I use a Nikon camera. Let's see what it did. This first line of information tells me the version of Python that was called to run the source code. So it should make sense to you, more sense to you now that you see it on the screen. So this is where the Python interpreter is located. And it says, okay, I'll run Python, but what would you like me to run through Python? And here it is. It's the Python source code file that's being presented to Python. Once it runs, it says three different tasks to do. Output, my name is Professor Stefanelli, which is right here. I love to cook, which is right here. And I love photography and I use a Nikon camera, which is right here. Once Python completed those three individual tasks, these are output statements, the output functions, the program terminates. It's finished. It's done. Process finished with exit code 0. Exit code 0 means the program stopped or finished, and the code 0 means without errors. Now, since we've executed this block of code already, notice that in the upper right-hand corner, the green arrow and the green bug are now available. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add one additional line of code. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say print. This is really cool. I now am a seasoned programmer. Okay, now put that in, and the only thing that's left to do is to execute it again. Remember how to do this. We can use the green arrow, or we can go back up to run and run. Okay, I'm going to do that again. Run, run, and that little window shows up. It's just confirming this is the one you want to run, right? I'm going to go ahead and do that. The bottom portion of the screen should clear, and now we have an extra line of output. These three lines worked. This fourth output function that we just added, this is really cool, is now showing up below the information regarding the programmer. Okay, so that's it. Just to confirm it, because you probably don't believe that it automatically saved, let me show you. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of PyCharm because I do believe that it does save it. I'm going to go ahead and close. It's going to confirm, are you sure you want to exit PyCharm? I'm going to choose exit. And once I'm done, it should bring me back to the desktop. Now, to prove it, I should be able to go to the G drive And if I go ahead and choose my computer and go to the G drive, and if you remember, we had to navigate to the lab number 1 folder located in lab activities, which is located within the CS151 file folder, which is in summer 2018, which is in home. I just went backwards. So home, summer 2018, CS151, lab activities. I'm double clicking, by the way. Lab number 1, and you didn't really think that I was going to be there, did you? So this is the lab activity that we did, and I want you to notice the icon. As a result of what we did with associating PyCharm with a .py file extension, you now have the ability to double click on this one file, and I suggest getting used to double clicking on the icon. I know you're probably not going to do it, but it really is a good idea to double click on the icon, because if you don't, and one day you happen to be tired and you double click and it's a little bit slow, this is what can happen. It goes into rename mode, which means that it allows you to change the name, which if this is not what you really wanted to do, you may panic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the icon, since it's going to pull PyCharm. Watch what happens when I double click on the source code file. It should launch PyCharm and then take that source code file and open it up inside of PyCharm. Let's see what it does. There it is. There's our code. And so it's ready to go. And then you can continue working on it. I'm going to close these windows out. And if you needed to add additional information, you can. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and add 2 more lines of code and say, this was a great experience. Bye for now. And I'm going to go ahead and run this again and see what it does. Notice it comes up with the name, and the lower portion of my screen should change to an output window, and it works. So you had an opportunity to see, just as a recap, the 2-step process that's required in order to run a Python source code file or generate a brand new source code file. First is to create a project. The 2 parameters that you need to be mindful of when you're dealing with the project is what the location is, and you'll follow the instructions on the lab activity document. Second is to tell PyCharm where Python is. Recall how to do that. Then what we did was we actually started a new Python file. Once you create a new Python file, the editor opens up so you can enter your source code, and then under Run and Run, it allows you to run your source code, and your output will appear in the lower portion of the screen. By the way, what you also have the ability to do is to actually make the window larger. So I'm going to take my mouse and put it in between the output and the output window and the editor window, and you notice that icon changes to a vertical arrow up and down. I'm going to click and drag it up so the output window actually gets a little bit bigger, or you can drag it down to make it smaller. Okay, that's it for now. I hope this was helpful, and try to go through this process yourself, and the best way to get proficient at it is to go through and do it repeatedly over and over again. So I wish you the best of luck, and we'll talk again soon.